let's get into it. My problem with the idea of content creators. My personal grievance with the idea of content creators. You would think in a world where the interweb cyberspace is a thing, that people would unreservedly and without hesitation speak their mind, articulate their thoughts, and then post whatever. Say they do it in a video format such as this, they would not hesitate to post their opinion online and see how it is received. But this seems not to be the case. Instead of the internet being this space where ideas can simply flow and congeal, amalgamate, battle, kill one another. Instead of the internet being that place where thoughts could just be spilled into and people could discuss and decide which ones are worth continuing to discuss and which ones are worth just shedding. Instead of it being that, there seems to be some sort of a suppressive force at work that determines what can and cannot be said. Now, before we get conspiratorial here, as if that's a bad thing, conspiracies aren't inherently bad. Before we get conspiratorial, this suppressive force could be as mundane, as impersonal and indifferent as economic incentive. That which determines what can and cannot be said is economic incentive. It could be as simple as that. But let's see if we can figure out how to identify this suppressive force at work. Are there indicators that we can identify and use to say, oh, okay, that's the suppressive force that prevents certain things from being said and artificially amplifies other things being said at work? Yes, there are indicators. One of them is the use of derogatory epithets like anti-vaxxer, like conspiracy theorist, like climate change denier. You can, if you find yourself caught in the crossfire of these derogatory epithets, or if you find yourself having them hurled at you, or you observe them being hurled at somebody else, you can be fairly confident that there is the presence of this suppressive force at work. Because what do those epithets do other than dismiss the person who is speaking, instantly dismiss them and consider anything else that they subsequently say as suspicious, or just outright ignore them? That's all they function to do, those epithets. They're just a slag. It's like, that person, no need to listen to him. He's been called an anti-vaxxer. He's been called a climate change denier. He's been called whatever, a conspiracy theorist. So they function to simply shut down conversation. So that's one indication of, or indicator of, this suppressive force at work. Another indicator of this suppressive force at work, and this is insidious, it is the impulse to self-censor. You will find yourself thinking thoughts that go against the groupthink or the newspeak. No, not the newspeak. Whatever, there's a 1984 reference here and I just can't figure it out. There is, okay, groupthink, and then you're thinking thoughts that are contradictory to the groupthink, so you self-censor. That is terrible. And this is obviously a personal indicator because nobody else can tell you when you're self-censoring. Only you can admit that to yourself. But the impulse to self-censor is itself also an indicator of this suppressive force at work. So let's figure out, we have journalists and we have content creators. There's an analogy there between the two. The journalists use the legacy mass media platforms to convey their message, whereas the content creators use social media platforms to convey their message. both creators, let's call them journalists and content creators, are subject to this suppressive force, and so they will tailor their message to suit the gatekeeping demands of these two platforms. So in this diagram that I have flipped up onto the screen right now, you can see that within the box of the range of all possible discussable topics, there are two circles. One, the discussed topics, and two, topics that have the attributes that allow a journalist's message to break into the large or the legacy mass media platforms and actually be conveyed via those LMMs. So on the underground, when you're interacting with people, you will discuss topics and openly discuss topics. But you find that those topics aren't openly discussed in the public square. For want of a better word, we can call the LLMs the public square. Only those topics that are at the intersection of discussed topics and topics that have the attributes to get through the gatekeeping mechanism, only those topics will be publicly discussed. So that's weird, because there's a sort of cognitive dissonance that induces. Because you find yourself discussing these topics on the underground, say, but then they're not discussed in the public square, and if they are discussed in the public square, you actually happen to have an opinion that is contrary to the opinion that they, or the conclusion that they arrive at on the LMMs. So that induces a cognitive dissonance, and you think to yourself, okay, either I have to self-censor, or I'm going to be called a derogatory epithet. So that's terrible. But there's this analogous suppressive force in the content creation realm, and this is where we get to my problem, my grievance with content creation and content creators. You would think on the interweb cyberspace that this is an arena where all thoughts can just be spewed out into and just battle it out and have at it with each other. Boom! All these thoughts, all these concepts, all these ideas can just battle it out and may the best man win, sort of a thing. But no, the suppressive force is also at work, causing content creators to tailor their message to this social media platform gatekeeping mechanism. You can see on the diagram that I've flipped up on the screen right now that there is an analogy to be made between the LMMs and the SMs and their gatekeeping. It's not necessarily an analogy, it's more or less directly comparable, but the attributes that make social media content break through the gatekeeping will differ from the attributes that make a journalist's message break through the gatekeeping of the large or legacy mass media platforms. But we also have indicators of this suppressive force at work for the content creators. Audience capture is one. This is when a content creator will tailor their message to appeal to their audience. But because their audience will become ever more extreme in terms of their viewpoints on the world, so too the content creators' content will become ever more extreme. And because of that extremeness, it's sort of one-sided, and so it's only a partial analysis. So the message is defunct. A second indicator of a content creator having been suppressed by this suppressive force is an unwillingness to broach those topics that have become politicized and so cause serious polarization. And the politicization of these topics stems from the legacy mass media and how they're dealing with whatever topic that's in question. A third indicator allowing economic incentive to determine what you say So for content creators, one of the main metrics is views. The more views you get, the more successful your content. It's used as a proxy measure to determine how successful your content is. With the more views, then you have more opportunities for sponsorship and your ads get seen by more eyes, and so you therefore earn more money as a result. So some people, it's similar to audience capture, but it's more focusing on the economic incentive. Some people just go down the pathways that will maximize their financial gain. And fourth indicator, and these lists are by no means exhaustive, these are just what I can think of in the moment: sensationalism. When content becomes sensationalized so as to clickbait you into clicking into the video. Well, no, clickbait is an example of sensationalizing content so that you click into it, and then when you click into it you get just bombarded with this sensationalized content. And the problem with that is, in sensationalizing content, you probably do away with the main message that you were trying to get through, because reality is quite actually boring, complex, mundane. Actually, in the complexity it's quite interesting, but to capture and hold attention, content creators will sensationalize the content so that they win at the game of content creation. Here is the moral of the story. We need to figure out a way to merge the work of investigative journalists and content creators. Boom. And no, this is what we need to do. Figure out how to have the ideal hypothetical figure of a content creator and the ideal hypothetical figure of an investigative journalist sleep together, create a baby, and that baby is the novel way that we will be able to convey messages to human beings on this fine earth of ours, because this oppressive force must be subverted. Yeah, we must figure out a way to get around self-censoring, to get around sensationalizing content, to get around these things and actually win, outcompete the journalists and content creators who are currently winning the attention of humans and doing more to pollute the information ecology than they are to clean it up. So one way of doing this is to create a community of people, reasonable, sensible people who align in terms of their values and what it is that they want. Keep it that broad. That content can be distributed to and reasonably discussed.